8th meeting summary. Any questions, or if not, I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, if not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Motion passes. Item 2 is our update on the RMAP activities, and Jeanette is going to give us an update on that.
All right, thank you, Farhad, members of the committee. My name is Jeanette Duran, Transportation Planning Director. Just here today to give you a brief update on the Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan, also known as the RMAP. So you'll hear that term. You've probably heard it a million times, and you'll hear it some more. But as you guys know, it is our federally mandated long-range plan that we update every 4 years, and we're in the process of working on our next version of it. Of course, our main concern is meeting our federal requirements, and the main element of the plan is to include reasonable assumptions about the future growth of our region. We strive to ensure that the investments are responsive to the future of the region, and make sure that we're meeting the intent of the community. The last RMAP was approved in September of 2020, right in the height of COVID. So we're kind of in a different situation this time, and a completely different environment. Our RMAP is a performance-based plan, and you've probably heard that term performance-based planning several times, but part of what we're going to be doing is re-examining our performance measures and making sure that we're headed in the right direction in those key areas. We've also started working with our jurisdictions on developing our fiscal constraint components. So as you recall, the RMAP has to be a fiscally constrained document, and it's based on a reasonable assumption of revenues for the next 20 years. So part of that is re-examining our methodology on how we look at those revenues. And we've shifted towards doing our revenue projections very similarly to how ADOT does their revenue projections. They have a team of economists, so we are tapping into those resources and working with our jurisdictions to come up with that fiscally constrained number. We obviously have to make sure that the TIP is reflective of what's shown in the RMAP. So we do include all the projects that are in the current TIP, that are under construction and design. Those are key components of the RMAP. Get those right in on that project list, because all the projects that eventually wind up in the TIP have to be reflected in the RMAP. So to do that, we're reaching out to jurisdictions. This month, we're going to open our RMAP Project Explorer, very similar to the RTA Next Project Explorer. In fact, the RTA Next Project Explorer was built off the model from the 2016 Project Explorer. So we're going to open that up to our jurisdiction partners. So some of you, I look at Paul and Jason in particular, are very familiar with that. And we'll start pulling projects in to build that project list. The exercise that Rick and his team are doing with the RTA costs, that information will be pulled into the Project Explorer, and we'll continue to refine that project list as it's really a big key component of the long range plan. So part of that Project Explorer is to look at not just the cost of the projects, but the scope. So over the past 4 years, in the 2020 plan, those projects were updated in 2018. So there's quite a bit of change from what was anticipated in that plan versus what the jurisdictions are probably anticipating in the next several years. So some of those project scopes might have been refined. The length of the projects might have changed. There might be new features that are going to be looked at to be included. So we'll go into that project list and really start to refine what's in there. The locations of some of those projects might also need to be updated as well. And then we'll re-examine the performance data for each of those projects. Okay, so we're going to be opening that Project Explorer. Like I said, we're going to keep it open for a few months. That way there's ample time to go in there and get all the information. And we'll also be providing a training to your TPC reps. One big step that's happened in the past couple months is the approval of the population projections. So that those numbers came through the committees, and that's all being folded into our land use modeling and our activity-based model, so that we have the most accurate projections on our population. We've also purchased a survey tool. We're going to be putting together a survey and hopefully deploying it here pretty soon. And Sheila with our team has put together a full deployment plan, and we anticipate a strong response rate on that one. Like I said, the revenue projections have been worked on by the TPC, and we're going to continue to bring updates to them as we add information into that. And we'll bring updates to this committee as well as to regional council. As I mentioned, we're coordinating very closely with the RTA Next effort and with Rick and his team. And it's really important for us to examine the marriage between those two initiatives, the long range plan and the RTA plan. So you'll hear conversations throughout the next year on how we're going to marry those two together. And then of course we are going to have to reflect in the next RMAP the results of that planning effort. So that's a task that we're going to continue to refine. That's all I have right now. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
All right, thank you. Carmen, go ahead.
You'd mentioned a survey. Who is that going out to? Is it the jurisdictions?
It's going to be the entire region.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it'll go out to the public as well.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned over the next year. So generally high level, what are we looking at as a timeline when we would see an RMAP presented for action by this body?
Probably late next year. Mm-hmm. A lot will depend on the election and the time frame. What we don't want to happen is bring a draft of the RMAP to the committees and then have the election the next month, and then
Understood.
so we're trying to balance the timing out that way.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? This is for information. If there are no other questions, thank you, Jeanette. All right, the next item is our regional transportation revenue update, and Jamie's going to provide the update. Thank you, Jamie.
You're welcome, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to provide a brief update on regional transportation revenues. I'm filling in for David Zinda, who always does an excellent job of this. He usually just goes through the information in the packet and gets sort of the high points. So I'll do the same today. So in terms of RTA TPT revenue collections, we have 12 months of data. And so the total for fiscal year 23 stands at just shy of $119 million. This represents a 7.9% year-over-year growth. In terms of HERF, looking at the total distributions throughout the PAG planning area, so that includes the direct HERF as well as HERF 12.6 and HERF 2.6, we have 11 months of data. And so the total through May stands at just over $162 million, which is a 3% year-over-year growth compared to fiscal year 2022, and compared to the 5-year average that stands at over 12%. Focusing on HERF 12.6, again, just through May, the 11 months, we've got a total of $26.4 million, and that's a 7.5% increase from this time in fiscal year 2022. For HERF 2.6, the total through May stands at $5.8 million, which is a 14.4% increase from the previous fiscal year. For the HERF 12.6 balances, that stands at through May at just shy of $67 million. And in terms of gasoline sales, July through May, the Pima County's percentage of the statewide total is at 13.1%, which is very similar to previous fiscal years. And with that, I'm happy to take questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Jamie. Any questions? So again, as mentioned, all the revenues are performing really well. So that's good news. And as we start getting projects that are shovel ready or under construction, opportunities to make sure that those projects can be completed. Paul.
Or as we move into the future, does this body or this organization have kind of a contingency plan as electric vehicles become more and more prevalent and gas gets less and less used?
Yeah, good question. Good question. The conversations are ongoing, obviously. So as we track our revenue, that would be one of the reasons that potentially the revenues might start declining. that conversation is taking place at the federal level, at the state level. Obviously, we'll continue to inform this group if we start seeing that negative trend. And it is definitely a bigger policy issue that if that happens, then what do we do in the future? So I would assume as part of our revenue forecast for the long range plan, we'll have to adjust and make some hopefully contingency policy discussions as part of that long range plan. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Just a comment, Farhad, in the backup materials, there's a couple of slide presentations and I think they're misplaced in there. They're dated March 8th and it includes overall work program. It includes TIP. It includes legislative updates. So those are not backup material for this meeting, and there are no separate slides for the topics we just covered.
I believe you're looking at the minutes from the last meeting. As part of the minutes from the previous meeting, we include those slides as well.
But then it goes right after that. It goes to the, okay.
It
Then
took
it
me
goes
a
to the
minute to find it.
financial update is
There
right
you go.
after that.
There
Okay,
you
so so there was no presentation for
Not
our
for
map
today.
or the financial update. It's just the,
Just a memo.
I got, okay, thank you.
Yeah, so again, just so everybody follows, so typically the minutes from the previous meeting includes the slides from the previous meeting in your packet as well.
And the revenue update, Carmine, for me, started on page 32.
I
Okay,
found
you got
that.
that.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions on that item? Again, it's for information, and thank you, Jamie. I'll move on to the next item, and Jamie's gonna take care of that one as well, and that's our legislative updates.
Thank you, Farhad. Members of the committee, appreciate the opportunity. Again, filling in for David Zinda always does an excellent job at these legislative updates. So we're in record-breaking territory with this legislative session. We stand at 183 days, which is the longest session in state history. The previous record was set in 1988 at 173 days. The bills introduced 1,672 this session, bills signed 202, bills vetoed 143. The Arizona legislature passed a budget for fiscal year 2024 a couple of months ago, amounting to around $17.8 billion. This is thanks to strong revenues above and beyond what is needed to maintain state operations. The budget outlines a spending plan for fiscal year 2024 that includes many one-time spending and revenue changes. Some of the more notable adjustments include additional one-time funding for education, a reallocation of results-based funding for an ongoing increase in K-12 funding, an individual income tax rebate, capital and transportation infrastructure investments, and a significant number of smaller one-time appropriations. Total transportation-related projects amount to $653.5 million. Senate Bill 1722 shows some of the projects of interest in our area, as well as those capital outlays. A few examples include the $89 million for the I-10 widening Casa Grande to Chandler. Of course, that's not in our area, but that affects all of us who travel on I-10. I-10 Cortaro Road traffic interchange, $10 million. The Drexel Road Bridge improvements, $15 million. And SR 77 pavement rehabilitation, $3.2 million, which is an adjustment to the appropriation from last year. The legislature has recessed until July 31st, at which time they will return to consider some remaining bills, is our understanding. Among them, they may likely be considering another attempt at the extension of Proposition 400, set to expire after 2025. Proposition 400 generated $665 million last year. And so loss of this revenue could strain other state revenue sources distributed throughout Arizona. Now, turning to some of the bills that we've been watching, of course, this list has been narrowed down considerably. All three deal with limiting the amount of transportation funding. So SB 1312 establishes prohibitions on considering vehicle miles of travel and transportation or land use planning, recording a person's vehicle miles of travel, and imposing a fee or tax based on a vehicle miles of travel. It passed out of the Senate as well as the Transportation and Infrastructure House Committee. It passed out of the House Committee of the Whole before the legislature temporarily adjourned in June. Senate Bill 1340 prohibits a county board of supervisors from granting an application to construct a toll road if the proposed toll road will be converted from a publicly funded or maintained street or highway. This prohibits ADOT from entering into a public-private partnership agreement that allows the conversion of an existing publicly funded or maintained street or highway to a toll road, including a conversion to implement a traffic management strategy as prescribed. This was signed into law by Governor Hobbs on May 8th. And finally, Senate Concurrent Resolution 1018, which would be a 2024 general election ballot item. This was, of course, subject to voter approval. This would constitutionally prohibit the imposition of a tax or fee based on vehicle miles traveled and any rule or law that monitors or limits a person's vehicle miles traveled. This passed out of the Senate and passed out of House committees. And so this one will continue to be watching. So that concludes my report. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
All right. Go ahead.
Is Mr. Huffman feeling sad and wistful that you were not back at the legislature?
No, I like that.
All right, well, thank you for that, Jamie. Any questions? So we'll keep you posted once they get back into session. We know there might be potentially additional discussions on the MAG RTA as well. So if we see anything interesting, we'll update you on that as well. If there are no other questions, all right, thank you, Jamie. This is for information as well. We're doing really well on time, so we're going to adjourn. And thank you. We're adjourned, and we're going to take a break and start the TMC meeting right at 9 o'clock as posted. All right, thank you.
All right.
All right, we got 10 minutes.
Welcome.
That was good. as soon as Jan gets back.
No, I think we mostly added.
We could do this one in front of me.
I hope so. Make a motion. We're good to go. Jan's chairing today.
Where is she?
I don't know.
Now.
That's gonna be a really quick meeting.
It should be very quick.
Hey, Mike. Mike's voice is kind of like this. Green bean.
I'm watching all of it.
You know, he can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear everything. Man, that quieted you all down.
All right. So I think everybody's here and Mike is online, and at his request, since he's online, Jan is chairing the meeting, and you're ready. All right, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll call to order this morning's meeting of the Technical Management Committee. I believe you've all received a copy of the March 8th minutes. If you've had a chance to review, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion, concerns? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed?
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, just a correction. It's the April 12th and April 26th meeting summary is just for your reference.
My motion stands.
Well, my second does. That's fine. My apologies. Thank you. And then Mr. Mojimi and Ms. Rico, I think, to talk about the RTA next plan development updates.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the TMC. Taki will give you a quick overview here, but before we get started, I just want to make sure that to clarify for everybody's benefit, there's been a lot of discussions both at the board level as well as the CAC level and the working group. So we'll clarify any questions, anything that needs clarification, but for your benefit, and Paki will get into this, at the last CAC meeting, there was a motion that passed by the CAC, and we really want to dive in and discuss that motion. And when we get to it, I'll give you more details on that. So Paki, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mogami, Madam Chair, and good morning to all of the TMC members. So my update today is going to be just giving you a quick recap of the activities since your last meeting back in April. I'm not going to go do a play-by-play on all of the meetings, but there were 5 ad hoc TMC working group meetings that were held during this time. And as you recall, this ad hoc working group consisted of 1 member from each jurisdiction and 6 CAC members, 3 of them being the CAC officers. This working group was an effort to collaboratively, communicate between the TMC and the CAC on the RTA next plan. One of the things that occurred from that is the draft framework that is in your packet today and also has been handed out here in the room. This was recommended to the CAC on May 31st by the TMC working group, and then the CAC endorsed the draft framework on June 5th. So that's the latest endorsed plan we have. At the June 22nd RTA board meeting that was held, the board provided an update. We provided an update to them on committee activities, and then that they agreed that it was important that the CAC reach consensus on development of the new RTA plan, the priorities, and the next steps. The RTA board also approved the July 1st deadline previously established. So that's what we continue to work towards. Then at the June 26th CAC meeting, an alternative proposal was submitted by an informal group of the CAC members. It was presented and discussed on June 26th, and then a side-by-side comparison was also done at that time. One of the motion that was made was to approve the alternate proposal. However, the additional changes will require the rate to raise the RTA half cent sales tax to 0.3%. So that's where we are right now with the proposal, and I'll be going over the side by side in a minute. I just wanted to remind you all that we're continuing to work off the original milestones, which include August 2023 for the RTA board to review and approve the draft plan for public review. August through October is we're hoping to have the public review of the draft plan and feedback. October to December of this year, we're hoping to have the final plan revisions based on that public feedback. And then hopefully establishment of the election date and RTA board approval. That's the goal that we're working towards. I will now go over the slides, which are also in your packet. This is the side by side based on the PAC's recommendation at the June 26th meeting. Just quickly, the left side represents the RTA working group recommendation that was made on May 31st, as I mentioned, that the PAC also endorsed. The left column is also consistent with the RTA board directive, and that is with the continuation of the 0.5% sales tax. Middle column represents the motion that was passed by the CAC on June 26th. And this is with the additional 1/10 sales tax. And then on the third column is the feedback we're providing, and that is available for discussion today. We have one CAC officer here. Carolyn Campbell is here in the room. And we also have our two liaisons, Terry Rosema and Carmine DeBonis, who are the TMC liaisons available for additional feedback. So beginning with the roadway element, as you all know, the RTA board directive is 1.12 billion. And the motion passed by the CAC came up to 1.13 billion. What the CAC proposed were dividing up the multimodal roadway element into capacity enhancements, operational, new roadway, and modernization. And these were the priorities that the TMC had also approved. They also added bus pullouts for 10 million. So what this category does is it does fund the roadway corridor element as recommended by the working group, and it adds the $10 million for bus pullouts. The bus pullouts, as you may recall, was moved from the safety element over to the roadway corridor element. The deferred projects are at 230 million, and this funds the deferred projects, so that stays the same. My intent is to go through the slide side by side, and then if you want to hold your questions to the end, that's all right. So moving on to the safety element, the RTA board had recommended 150 million for the safety element. The motion that the CAC passed brought it to 160 million. So 65 million for speed management and 95 million for corridor and intersection safety improvements were the two sub-elements that the CAC was proposing. Our feedback for you is that it moves $10 million for the bus pull-ups to the roadway corridor element. Oops, sorry, said that. It creates two new sub-elements and increases the safety element by 20 million. In addition, one of the things that we were not clear on is the speed management sub-element. This may not be RTA eligible. The definition that was provided by the CAC says projects that reconstruct facilities to align the design with designated speed limits and surrounding land uses to improve safety and mobility. We would like a little bit more clarification on that definition. As you all know, reconstruction must be justified to be eligible. And then continue on with safety element. There's a second sub-element called corridor and intersection safety improvements. If corridors are considered, they must be named on the ballot for the RTA statute, as we have all been reminding all of you. And then the intersection safety improvements must be justified to be eligible. So those were our comments for the safety element. Moving on to the environment element. Again, the recommended allocation for this was 30 million. The CAC is recommending 60 million. They wanted to increase wildlife linkages to 40 million and then add another sub-element called infrastructure to improve climate change resilience and preparedness for 20 million. What this element does is increases environmental element by 30 million and it creates a new sub-element. And we have the same comment for the new sub-element, the infrastructure to improve climate change resilience and preparedness. We would like to clarify that definition, which says projects that construct and or improve green infrastructure to mitigate air pollution and the urban heat island, as well as improve safety and congestion during storm events. Continuing on with the environment element, the infrastructure to improve climate change resilience and preparedness sub-element also must be transportation related, and reconstruction must be justified based on infrastructure condition eligible. Moving on to the transit element, the board had allocated 510 million for this element. The CAC's motion changes it to public transit element for 691 million. This would include capacity enhancements of 115.5 million, operational of 20 million, new transit connections for 115.5 million, continuation of existing service for 370 million, and then 70 million for a regional high capacity transit project. What this proposal does is it increases the transit element by 181 million and it creates new sub-elements. The capacity enhancement sub-element does not explain what these are and how they enhance transit services. So that's something we're looking for more clarification. And the operational also does not explain what these needs are and how they enhance transit services for per RTA regulations. Additionally, the sub-elements for this element for transit, they're inconsistent with the recommendations that the CAC Transit Element Subcommittee had originally proposed. They're also not consistent with PAG's adopted long-range regional transit plan, known as the LRRTP, and they're also not consistent with PAG's long-range mobility and accessibility plan, the RMAP. As for the regional high-capacity transit project, it does not explain if this refers to a streetcar, a bus rapid transit system, or something else, and if dedicated lanes are proposed on State Route 77, which would be the Oracle Road. The next element was the small business assistant and admin cost element. This was 110 million, and this was consistent with the previously adopted framework. Active transportation element, the recommendation from the board was 90 million, which also, as a reminder, this is also integrated into other elements. And then the motion that was passed by the CAC includes two sub-elements to the active transportation element. One is connectivity and compliance enhancements, and the other one is dedicated infrastructure improvements, both for $51 million. So what this element does is it increases the active transportation funding by 12 million and creates the new sub-elements. And so for the connectivity and compliance enhancement, these are not RTA eligible and RTA cannot supplant for compliance responsibilities. For the dedicated infrastructure improvement sub-element, these must be justified based on the infrastructure condition to be eligible if it involves reconstruction. Moving on to contingencies and the grand total. The contingencies were kept at 100 million, which is consistent with the previously adopted framework. The original grand total from the RTA board direction was 2.334 billion. With this motion, with a 1/10 sales tax increase, the grand total moves up to 2.59 billion. This is about 250 million over the board approved budget, and it adds 250 specifically to the categorical elements with this proposed 1/10 of the sales. So with that concludes the side-by-side. Again, that's in your packet and that you received. And I will now turn over to our TMC liaison, Farhad or Carolyn, to provide any additional information.
If you don't mind, go back to the previous, thank you. So one point we want to clarify, and I think there was some questions about that. So there are two proposals, the one to the right, adopted by CAC on 6/5, the one in the middle, adopted by the CAC on 6/27. The only difference between the two at this point is half-cent sales tax versus 0.6 sales tax. And the additional revenue that would be generated from the 0.6 sales tax is proposed to fund additional $250 million of categoricals. So that was the action of the CAC, that was the recommendation. So it really comes down to if you want to really get to the core of the issue, it comes down to half-cent versus 0.6 cent sales tax. Once that decision is made, then we can continue the conversation.
So just a point of clarification. The CAC's proposal, I mean, I've heard this and I really appreciate it, but there was some previous discussions about what was really proposed that we're not considering, or CAC did not consider reducing in their motion and action, reducing the corridor projects by a certain amount.
So correct, Madam Chair, Jane. The ultimate motion was increase the tax and fund the projects as previously proposed, plus additional $250 million.
And if the proposal to increase tax is, doesn't pass muster with the board, then where is the board at? Back to the left column?
That would be obviously the decision of the board and recommendation of this body, but the proposal on the left column is fiscally balanced and has been gone through the vetting process. That would be a good starting point.
Carolyn, yes, Chair, the CAC. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And first of all, I want to clarify one other thing that was part of the motion, and then I'll kind of explain, if it would be helpful, kind of how this developed, because I was a member of the group that came up with this. But as far as the transit, part of the motion and why those transit sub-elements are laid out there is not to substitute for the transit sub-elements from the transit committee. Part of it was that there are many people in the transit committee and in our full committee that would like to see the results of the Suntrans comprehensive operational analysis. And that might provide us with some more information. And then with the extra transit money, that might lead us to where we can put that and where it might be needed. So part of it was, this isn't done. We were going to have at least one more transit subcommittee meeting where we will take this and have those results and then go from there. So that explains the public transit element. And the other, and I guess I'll just explain real briefly. So we've been meeting for 5 years, most of us, some of us, the newer ones, for a year or so. And we've had a lot of good discussions, and people didn't seem to have a problem with the roadway corridor element and the projects in it. But the problem has also always been around people wanting more money for transit and for some of the others. So we were kind of had a little bit of a conundrum. So that's why the week before, and I know you all talked about it, is when there was a vote to adopt the framework. Not only was it a split vote, but we're talking about it's just the framework. We still have work to do, because how are we going to get more money into the system, particularly for transit? And there's that high capacity transit that, we've all been dealing with for a while. So anyway, after all these meetings where there were different views from different elements and what was more important, we really weren't getting anywhere because nobody really liked exactly what was put before us. So as usually happens, a few of us got together from these different kind of subgroups of interests, and we hammered something out. It's like the last meeting, you all had looked at the Moss proposal, which was from one of our newer CAC members, but it wasn't really embraced by everybody. So we kind of took that, which was really great. We finally had another option to look at. We took that and we just played with the numbers. Well, when we played with the numbers and got the amount in the categories that we thought would be sufficient, it had to come from somewhere. So that at the last, like part of that motion then became the additional 1/10 of a cent. However, this is only part and parcel of our proposal. We haven't dealt with yet the second part, which goes together with it, which is our policy considerations that we're hoping the board will take some or all of them. So that will be when we talk about that, and if they get adopted in this format or something similar, then we will that will go along and it'll explain some of our thinking, I think, with the new proposal. And I mean, I have spreadsheets. This is just the side by side, which really, lays it out pretty well. But one of the policy considerations, for example, is that the board look at look at the baseline forecast instead of the pessimistic forecast, which would raise about as much or a little bit more as the extra 1/10 of a cent. And there's a lot of other issues there too that we're still working on. So, I mean, that's kind of I guess, just a snapshot of the thinking that's behind all this. And at our next meeting, we will be dealing with those policy considerations. And that'll kind of get the picture a lot clearer as to what we're recommending to the board. And then, of course, we need to hear from the board. I also wanted to say that another member of our group and the person that's really behind the policy considerations, Bruce Wright, is here. And, I think it would be great to hear from him too, if you have questions about follow-up questions for me or more about the policy considerations and where we'd like to go from here. So hopefully that helped.
Thank you.
Mr. Wright, if you want to speak, do you have anything to share with the group about the policy?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So just a couple preface remarks. I think if you looked at the vote that was taken a couple of weeks ago to endorse the framework and send that to the TMC for recommendation, it was a 9-7 vote. And 3 of us voted in favor of that with the understanding that we, as a committee, adopt a basic framework or construct for the plan, but that we had serious concerns about how the resources are being, or the investments were being allocated across the categories. And the Moss proposal was sent forward for your consideration as a starting point for that discussion. I don't think it's fair to suggest that 9-7 vote was a adoption of the plan. And so when it came back to the committee, it was pretty apparent that the committee members really wanted to consider different allocations across the 3 categories: roadway projects, categoricals, and transit. And the issue then was, how do we find additional funding to support the increased allocations to those 2 other areas? And there were 2 methodologies we looked at. One was to increase the tax by 1/10 of a cent, and the other was to look at the adoption of the baseline projections rather than the pessimistic projections. So based on that, we have then gone back to work and to try to understand what are the assumptions and the policies that underwrite our proposal, and then what should the final allocations be. And I don't think the committee has fully completed the process of exactly how many dollars ought to be allocated across each of those categories. In part, we reflected some of the comments that were made at the last CAC, which raised some important questions that we needed to consider. So what we're proposing to do at the next CAC meeting is to first take up the policy considerations, because those are the assumptions that underlie our proposal, and then to share a revised proposal on allocations to the committee for consideration.
If I'm going to ask one question, Farhad, I've been hearing just some rumblings that there's new numbers out for some. Have we gotten new information about the cost?
What you have is the latest and greatest. As you all recall, we are going through the cost estimating exercise. That information is still very preliminary. It's draft for review by by sponsoring agencies. So none of that is ready for consumption yet until we check, double check, triple check. And as you all recall, our commitment was to bring that back potentially as soon as that checking process has been completed by individual entities. So we hope to have that. Obviously, that's crossing the T's and dotting the I's phase of the process. And we hope to have that within the next few months.
Madam Chair, just, I know that PAG staff is working with the consultant on this. You guys are seeing draft preliminary numbers. Just your sense of things. Are these numbers coming in way over original estimates? Are you seeing it on both sides of the equation where some are coming in under, which I'd be surprised to see? Are most of them coming in over?
Yeah, nothing's changed. We've been saying all along, we anticipate that they're going to come over, and they are coming over. None of that has changed. Okay.
Ballpark by 10%.
Ballpark,
by 100%.
Everything has been increasing over the last 2 years in the 20 to 30% range, and that was where our expectation was.
Madam Chair, could I
Yes,
just,
I'm sorry.
quick, and our understanding, I'll ask Farhad, is with that 1/10 of a cent sales tax and it restored the corridor, road corridor element, but that's not the whole 1/10 of a cent. There's still, that's about half of it that went into that. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the motion, as you recall, at the very last minute, there was some assumptions made, and the assumption that was made by the maker of the amendment was that it's going to generate about $300 million. In reality, and we've checked, it's not really a linear relationship. It doesn't account for purchase behavior changes, but let's assume it's linear. If it's linear, it'll be closer to 450 million.
So I guess my point would be there's going to be more, there's still some more money from the sale.
Assuming we increase the tax.
Assuming, yes, but,
Yeah.
and that was one of,
And I think that's still an assumption that needs to be discussed. As far as obviously staff is concerned, the direction from the board was maintain the 1/2 cent.
right. And then at the last time that the consultant updated the numbers, the baseline was 2.7 billion instead of 2.4. So there's another 300 million there if they did both, of course. But I guess my point was with what Bruce had mentioned, that's we're looking at even a little bit more of a revision to the numbers due to, another 100 million or whatever it is when that number is.
Yeah, again, so that's a
Confirmed.
policy consideration for the board.
Yeah.
We've talked about, let's make sure we're not too hopeful that those numbers are going to come in as projected. Last time we used the baseline, and I think the lesson learned over the last 17 years was that using the baseline was probably not a good decision back in 2005. So the recommendation was to use the pessimistic projection, which is what the board approved back in November.
I was going to ask that question. I mean, based off of this last round, did whatever we use, but I guess we used the baseline way back when, and we fell short of those expectations.
Correct. And again, I'm talking to our economist who put together the projection. His strong recommendation was to use the pessimistic projection because there are just unknowns in a 20-year forecasting that nobody can guarantee.
So I guess what is the question that's before us? Is this just an update and you're seeking feedback?
No,
Are you voting on something?
We are
Asking
seeking
for-
feedback. This is back and forth between TMC and CAC. And again, we operate under actions of the committee. The action of the committee was what you see in the middle, which is 0.6% revenue. The action of this body and the TMC working group was what you see on the left-hand side, which is to follow the board's direction and maintain the 1/2 cent revenue budget.
So I think, given that, my feedback would be that a 1/10%, at least from our jurisdiction's perspective, is something that should not be on the board. That's not the direction that we were given. That's not the amount of money that we were given. And so that I think right off the bat takes this whole proposal off the board for me. So the other elements of it, there's things that are talked about in there that I think they just need, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the recommendations that are in here. So I couldn't even begin to give feedback on what's been proposed here because there are so many elements of it that aren't consistent with the direction that came from the board, that aren't consistent with the RMAP, that aren't consistent with the long range planning. So I wouldn't even know where to begin, quite frankly, to provide feedback at this point. But I think going up a tenth of a cent, I'm confident speaking for the town council on this, for the majority of the town council on this, that would be something they would not support.
Shane and then Paul.
So first and foremost, I want to acknowledge the heavy lift by CAC in continuing to have dialogue on an element of this proposal and plan that quite frankly didn't get a whole lot of attention over the last several months, and that was in the categorical side. I think there was responsible strategy in place that may have curtailed some of that conversation because this is a big plan, and the majority of that plan is sitting over here in the roadway or corridor projects, and we needed to get some finality because those were actually named projects, and so we needed to get there so that we could move on. I echo Terry's comments about the concern with the increased tax. As long as I've been with the town of Sahuarita, my mayor and council have expressed concerns about getting this thing across the finish line with our voters. And I have to trust that they know the voters better than I know them. And so there's a big concern about a proposal to increase tax. Now, I was quite confident and have expressed this confidence that the RTA board is going to be in the best position to determine whether or not there's an appetite, thank you, for a tax increase, but to help them understand whether or not it would be worth it or not, they needed a recommendation from us saying, okay, you have parameters, you want us to make a proposal to you or a recommendation to utilize, that budget. Well, here's the plan. But if you feel like the plan isn't sufficient and you need to go more because that's what the region is calling for, then as a board, you have the ability to say, okay, let's shoot for an increase in tax so that we can get these other elements. I believe that the work that the working group did together, representatives from CAC, the TMC, I think that we have a proposal in place that honors the criteria that was given to us, we were charged with by the board. So that column on the left, I think, gets us there. I know that there is a timeline too. I know that the board wrestled with, hey, do we extend the calendar and allow this working group more time? And I was present. I witnessed that discussion, and they went back and forth, and ultimately they decided to maintain the July deadline to get a recommendation to them. I guess I'll state that this recommendation on the left honors the charge that they've given us. Do I think it's a good idea to present options to the board? I don't have any problem with that, but I do struggle with not honoring the charge that they've given us. I think we've had a lot of time to wrestle with these things and we've had those wrestles, and we've had some really creative and positive and constructive conversations to advance the ball. Perhaps an option on the table would be recommend this to the board with the option of, if you wanted to consider a tax increase, the CAC is putting something on the table for you to chew on. But here's our recommendation. based off of the criteria that you've given us and charged us with. That might be a possible way forward to a yes, but I will caveat all of that I was on the phone with my mayor just coming in here. There is real tangible concern on the success of this plan if it comes lockstep with a tax increase, at least from my jurisdiction's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. Paul, but I just want to comment. Okay, that's Bill. I see you now. I was about to say I'm having a hard time saying it. Let's go to Paul and then over to Bill Carroll. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to say Oro Valley stands lockstep with the comments both from Sarita and from Marana. We have concern with regard to what an increase in tax, the lightning rod that would create with the voters. We really appreciate, the work of the CAC, particularly in making those definitions inside the categoricals. But at the end of the day, I think that Terry brought forward all the points that Oro Valley stands by as well.
Thank you. Bill, and then we'll go over to Ron. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have actually a couple of questions. First one's on the point, the extra 0.1% tax increase. I assume it doesn't require any legislative approval or any unanimous votes of all the councils and board of supervisors, that it just goes to a public vote, just like the half-cent sales tax would. Is that true?
Madam Chair, yes, Bill, the RTA has authority to take any tax proposal up to a penny to the voters for voter approval. It does not require any action by any other governing body.
Thank you, Farhad. Then my next question would be, would it be, I tend to agree that the extra 0.1% might be a really hard sell, and we can't afford to lose the half-cent sales tax to try and squeeze more projects in. But would it be possible to have two ballot votes, one for the half-cent tax with a specific agenda, and then a second one for an extra 0.1% with a separate specific agenda, which only gets approved if in fact the half-cent sales tax goes forward? And let the voters decide whether or not they think the extra 0.1% is valid or substantiated?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Bill, good question. We had that discussion roughly about 4 or 5 years ago with the task force that we put together for reauthorization of the RTA. The task force at the time felt that it might be confusing and difficult, and going back to the voters back to back may not be perceived as a good approach. So the task force didn't recommend that approach. Obviously, it's allowable, and as long as we follow the guidelines of the RTA statutes, we can take any 20-year plan up to a penny to the voters. But again, the task force did not recommend that approach at the time.
But Bill, we have discussed this more recently, that it's legal. We could make it as a recommendation. It's not been a request, but we could, I think, bifurcate it in a couple of different issues, but we're talking just the same thing we did. Thank you. Did you have any follow-up? Is that it?
That's it.
Good, thank you. Okay, Bob and then Carolyn.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I just bring up an echo the support from what the town of Marana and Sarita were saying. We stay the course on the half-cent, because the campaign is supposed to extend years. Get the public out there and thinking, oh, you're going to increase it. It's a whole different campaign. My thought is, can you go back to the board and request they look at the baseline revenue and take the game? I mean, what's the harm in going with the baseline number again? And just saying we've got 20 years, set up some policy issues or whatever, that if it's shortfall again, and we have this unique circumstances with COVID and whatever, that you have to deal with. But why not start with the baseline? The public will understand basically, because I don't know if it's, we're going to give them the comparison that we're using a conservative revenue. That's just my thought, whether the board would be able to entertain something.
Madam Chair, if I may, and Bob, the board had those conversations over the last 2 years, and they landed back on the pessimistic, mainly because the current plan now is basically addressing that decision that was made back in 2005. And we were looking at $230 million worth of projects that are being deferred. So they had that conversation. Obviously, they can continue to have that conversation, but I think they're sensitive to that.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to clarify something because we are focusing on this sales tax issue. The CAC, first of all, we're all really excited that we've really finally got consensus. We're moving towards consensus because we've been stuck for 5 years. So having this conversation last time was really helpful, and it was actually fun. I mean, we heard from everybody. Second of all, we were ready to vote on this package without the 1/10 of a cent sales tax. Right as we were ready to vote, that got added as a friendly amendment. So we wanted to do this anyway, but the other thing I wanted to reiterate is that what I said earlier, we're only half done because the policy considerations feed into what we're going to be doing. So a lot of us voted very reluctantly about the 1/10 of a cent sales tax, but it got us to a place where we still have work to do. But I think we're getting close. And so and I appreciate the technical expertise that we've gotten from you on all the, particularly the corridor projects, because that's what we were asking you to do. The 1/10 of a cent sales tax isn't, I mean, it'd be great to hear from you. It's not a technical issue. And I'm sorry that you're focusing on it because we were hoping you would focus on what we put together. With or without it, 1/10 of it, that's not what this is. This is not what it's based on, and it's not what it's dependent on, because like Bob said, one of our policy considerations is just that, the baseline. And if they want to do both, that's great, but I doubt they will, and they might not want to do either, but we're hoping for that. So I just wanted to clarify all that. We're finally really coming up with consensus, and I really want to emphasize that.
Michael?
Thanks, Jan. So I guess I will suggest that rather than bogging down on should it be a 6/10 or a half cent, it would seem to me that we still got some work to do, particularly when we haven't got the final cost estimates. When you look at the conversations that are ongoing with regard to those estimates, we're going down this path, and we're going to be having a very similar conversation here in the not too distant future. I think that's one piece. If you want to have a conversation about the 6/10, that's fine. But before we draw lines in the sand, I would say or suggest that we go out and poll it and see what resonates with the residents. The needs are great. I mean, that's pretty obvious that that's why we're coming up with these difficulties. Or trying to address these difficulties. So as we're going through this, if there is an interest in that, I would suggest that we poll it or we find out what would resonate with the voters. And I appreciate, the mayors and the councils, having a pretty good sense in their areas. But I also think there could be some additional data there. And I did say that was the last, but one other thing, I would like to see more specificity from the CAC on what their proposal is. I think it was kind of a last minute, as you all said, a last minute addition. Okay, now that you did that, what does that mean, and how does that translate into either the distribution of funding or what are the recommendations? Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. Terry and Shane and Jason.
So I guess my question, Carolyn, would be if it's not a half cent or a 1/10 of a cent that funds this, and the board's not willing to do the baseline, then that requires cuts of named roadway projects. And I don't see where those cuts are coming from. So I guess, to Mike's point, I think Mike makes a good point. I think there's work that has to be done. I'm glad that there's been consensus on the CAC's part, and that they're getting to a point where they feel like they're making progress. But I just see that there's a lot of unanswered questions with what's before us right now. Too many to really even say, well, if we got answers to this and this, we'd be good. There's a whole list of questions in my mind right now that would have to be answered in order for me to get behind this proposal as recommended.
Shane?
Similar as what Terry presented. If the CAC was ready to move on a plan, a proposal outside of the consideration of an additional tax, what was the proposal that you guys were considering? A reduction in roadway projects? And if that's the case, then what projects were the CAC proposing to cut so that we have something to consider? The other thing is when we get into, some of these numbers on the categoricals, I just don't know what's the basis, for transit, environmental, what's the basis behind those dollar amounts that you're allocating money to? There's no material behind that, no context behind it for me to weigh in on. And so that's where I'm kind of struggling. I appreciate the policy lift that still is ahead of us, regardless of the 10% tax. If we're talking the environmental, the safety, the transit. I mean, there's policy considerations around all of that. I do think that if, as a group, in our recommendation, we're not factoring in lessons learned from the past. I think we are just, we're not doing ourselves or our board any kind of justice or service. We have a responsibility to be looking at those things and considering it. We have a history in our region on tax performance. We did the baseline approach before. It failed us. It created people in our seats down the road a lot of frustration, a lot of public trust type issues because we over deliver and underperform. That kind of situation. I also know that based off of what Farhad has just said with the cost estimate exercise coming into play, this group, our region, is going to be looking at the need to cut projects further anyway. So again, I guess my position is we forward the left column to the board as a recommendation, a collective recommendation with an option that if they want to consider an additional tax, here's what you could do with that tax. And then let the board have their day and their conversation, understanding that we're going to have more work to do on the policy side, as well as we're going to need to further prioritize our projects, reduce scope, cut projects out, add more local money. I don't know. But what I do know is that it would be a mistake for us to ignore lessons learned from the past in our recommendation to the council for the future. Thanks.
Jason, I'm sorry. Jason, did you have your hand up? It was about an hour ago, but.
45 minutes. Don't mind.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to reiterate the stance that Terry and Shane and the other jurisdictions voiced earlier. I think it'd be a hard sell to go the additional 1% or no, 10%. And we represent an underserved community, Native nations, and so I think that'd be a hard sell for tribal communities. As Farhad had mentioned, cost estimates are coming in 20-30% higher than what's on the left column there now. So, and like Shane mentioned, we're going to have to come back to this exercise and cut some of the projects, or even, if we're going to maintain the left column, we might have to entertain the additional 1/10% just to fund what's on the left column. So.
Bill, give your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to say that, I really appreciate the CAC taking the stance. The 10% addition may or may not be an easy sell. But I think they did what their job was to do, is to identify what they believe the citizens that are going to be voting on this may be looking for in addition to roadway projects. And I don't think we want to lose sight of the fact that roadway projects sell to a lot of people, but the environmental issues, the increased transit, some of those kinds of things sell to people other than just the roadway users. And while we may or may not have an appetite to go to a 0.6% sales tax, as the board considers the base package and where do we go from here, Mike Ortega made the comment that, you know, really what this comes down to is a lot of polling. And I think it's important that in that polling, we also investigate whether or not some of these additional items that were brought up by the CAC, particularly on the environmental, the climate change, some of those kinds of things, that may be a major selling point. And I think we want to include that in the discussion with the voters, because if that becomes a major selling point, we may need to include it, even if we're going with the base, to be able to get those voters to come out and say yes.
Thank you, Bill. Paul, then Carolyn and Michael.
I have two points. One, I couldn't agree more with Shane with regard to, there's more work here on the definition of what, you know, there's $65 million of speed management. What does that really entail? One of the things that caught my eye was the intersection safety improvements. You know, what are we doing about red light runners? You know, that's an epidemic these days. That's where people are dying at the moment. But so I think there's a lot more work on that for that definition and creation of, and I'm really enthused with regard to the work that the CAC's done so far with trying to attack and look at what's in those categoricals. But the second point I want to make is back in 2005, there was original estimates put together, and we have a lot of lessons learned from the first RTA. And back when those estimates were being put together, I know there was, at least from my staff, there was a push on an escalation value. That escalation value ultimately did not make it into the plan. I think we're looking at it much more with much more hindsight and a much better approach this time around by redoing the estimates, looking at that high escalation value. Yes, we're going to be back at the table because we're not going to have enough money when we include all those escalation values into the project. But I guess I'm being kind of long-winded. Where I'm going here is that maybe we're not so far off on being able to use the baseline rather than the pessimistic, based on our approach now on the estimates. We're looking at those increased estimates now rather than back on the first RTA when those increased estimates were not ultimately included in the plan.
Thank you. Carolyn?
Yes, well, both Terry and Jane asked a question about our CAC regarding the roadway element without a 0.1%. And I'd say my pithy answer is budget estimates, you're going to have to work anyway. So just giving you a head start. But no, I mean, we in 2008, nobody saw that coming really, and it can come again, I'm sure. But yes, it was taking another look at the corridors and either reducing scopes or putting some more projects into the elements as the city did, or get, you know, like just cut projects. And like I said, you might have to do that anyway, but you know, there are options there, but I guess our point was, and our CAC has been saying this for 5 years, is that we were hoping that we could work on the categoricals simultaneously while you all were working on the roadway corridors. But we didn't, so it might have been a different goalpost that you were looking at. It's always been 1.12 million and you got to it, which is commendable. We started with 108 projects. But the board, what has resonated with us, the board always adopted these different percentages as a starting point. And so we took that to heart. And so there are a variety of ways to do that. And again, the baseline or the 0.1% is one of them. But I did want to answer your questions about where these numbers, and let's give you a couple of examples. You asked about the transit. We now have a $70 million HCT named project in transit. So they're right there as an additional 70. million. The active transportation that Pocky was asking about, it's listed on our list here. That's basically filling gaps in the sidewalks that a lot of people are worried about, or in the bike lanes, bike facilities now. But and another, just because I'm familiar with it, what they're based on is the wildlife linkages. And this is, the proposal here was less money than we had on the ballot last time. And in 2006, what we were asked to do, there was a, the expectation for the matching. And so I was able to generate, talking to public agencies, I actually had a list of the potential where we need a wildlife linkage, wildlife crossing infrastructure. And then that came out to 110 million, and some of them have already been taken care of. But so then the money on the ballot was a little less than half of that. So I mean, they are based, there are things that it's based on, and and then the other issue with the transit is that, we can take a look at the long range regional transit plan and come up with some future needs, because that also had like the baseline, the optimistic, different levels. And again, transit has been a big part of our conversation. So yeah, it definitely means that we'd have to do more work, but we're trying.
Madam Chair, just a follow-up question to what she said, please. So did CAC consider the fact that these corridor projects would address a lot of these concerns just in and of themselves? I mean, when we go and we do a corridor project, it includes sidewalk, it includes bike lanes, it includes landscaping, it includes all of that stuff. So there certainly has to be a value to the cause of improving our region's mobility, multi-mobility, through the corridor projects themselves. And so instead of it being a this or a that, I mean, it seems to me like the corridor projects are advancing to some extent all of these other subcategorical type issues. And I'm wondering, did the CAC give weight and credit to that?
Yes.
Why would we sacrifice corridor projects for the cause of adding sidewalks somewhere else, when the corridor projects in and of themselves are going to be adding new sidewalks or enhanced sidewalks or enhanced bike paths or more landscape? And I guess I'm just curious. It seems like it's cutting off your nose to spite your face kind of thing.
Well, yeah, so we did. And I will say that when we talk about gaps in sidewalks, new corridors and widened corridors, and the landscaping is going to be on a particular corridor, but we continue to see roads that aren't going to be on this, out of the 108.
That's throughout the whole
And there are
region.
people that are walking with their strollers and in wheelchairs in the road, and because the sidewalk stopped, and you see that everywhere in town. Those are the kind of things that we want to see when they're not a corridor project that's on the ballot.
But we realize, it's a good point, but we realize that if we sacrifice corridor projects, we're also sacrificing those things that are of importance to all of us. So it just doesn't make sense to me to put a proposal together that would diminish the corridor projects for sidewalks somewhere else, because then sidewalks are going to be not there in that corridor.
Okay, and I'll just do one last thing. I see that's why we were looking at options of how to do that, which you've talked about today. I mean, we agree with you.
Okay.
And I think, if I may, and then Michael, in just a second, part of what, listening to the different pieces today, I think that, and many of us are staff, so I think we want to do what the board told us to do, and also provide the board a recommendation in a couple ways. So perhaps what we want to look at is, I think the TMC has done a job putting together a package, and we've done it in a timeline that was given to us by the board, which is this month. But we're also hearing that great work is coming from the CAC, and that there's more meat put on the bones of that. Is it possible for us to put those two items together and say, we have a recommendation to the board from the TMC that is a response that meets the requirement of getting back to them in July. But then, as Shane, I think you were talking about, what's the asterisk that then says, we do believe, however, that a lot of discussion continues to occur at the CAC, and that they're looking to put some meat on some bones, and should it be the desire of the board, direct the TMC to take another 30 days, whatever, to continue a working group collaboration so that then we can try to deconflict some of this without putting two separate proposals to the board. So can we do both? Say we're reaffirming our proposal, we're sending it forward with the understanding that that meets the timeline. But if the board so chooses, we would be happy to look at and have another pass at working with the CAC.
Madam Chair, along those lines, obviously, we're going to continue to have the conversation with the CAC. There's another CAC meeting coming up. We can schedule additional working group meetings as needed, but we really wanted to make sure that they get feedback from this group. So hopefully we can start to kind of converge back to that direction. I think that's what's, in my opinion, that's the question for today. Are we moving further away from the left to the middle? And if we are, then let's keep talking. Because if there is the appetite for that, then yes, obviously we want to keep talking. If there's no appetite for the tax increase, that's where we go back to what Shane said. Well, then the cuts have to be made. Where are those cuts coming from?
And I think what I would like to do is bifurcate even the CAC piece. And Carolyn or Bruce help me with this, that I think there are a variety of recommendations that are in this plan that moves money around from what the TMC might have said.
Yeah.
And then there's another element that is the additional 1/10 of a cent, should people want to look at that. So I don't see it as, at least what I've been hearing, it's not just the 1/10 of a percent, it came in at the end. So could we ask people to, for me, part of it, that question for folks to look at is, what are the other elements? What are the proposals potentially coming in from CAC? Should we look at that? And is the other additional fee
So that,
on the table or not?
yeah, that'll be the feedback to the CAC. Talking to Tom McGovern, unfortunately, he couldn't be here today as the chair. He really wanted to be able to go back to the CAC and report back that this conversation was had, and here's the feedback from the TMC. But yes, consistent with what you're saying, he's hoping to ask that question. Again, he was one of the people who voted against this proposal. So he's really interested to hear your perspective. So maybe he can go back to the next CAC meeting and convey that as well.
Michael?
Thanks, Jan. Appreciate it. So a couple things. First of all, I would agree that more time is needed for us to have a better understanding of what the CAC was thinking, or some of the details of their proposal. I'm happy to hear report from Carolyn that there's movement and there's some good momentum there. So that gives me hope, and I'm looking forward to hearing that. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and I think I would not be ready to vote on anything today. I think that we need a little more information in order for us to react to that. So I would suggest pushing it back to the CAC or waiting until their meetings come forward here in hopefully next week or the week after. The other piece is a lot of conversation, some conversation about the pessimistic versus baseline projections. I've been a proponent of the pessimistic projections because, as I think Shane said, hey, we got to learn from what we did in 06. The one piece that I didn't think about until just now as I was listening to the dialogue, we should probably think about a scalable plan though. And what I mean by that is if we use the pessimistic projections and in fact they do come in at the baseline, what does that look like, right? What is that piece and how can that maybe translate into additional investments? And so all of a sudden, you think of the plan and it's scalable either up or down. Now, I recognize that the statutes require us to have named projects and then we're starting to really talk about scopes, et cetera. But I think if we generate it in a way where the overall plan and there are components to it that are scalable, I think that could actually help us in some of these conversations where we say, if revenues come in better than expected, then here's the game plan. And we present that now as a part of the conversation. It doesn't have to be in a lot of detail, I don't think, but at least in enough detail to give folks a level of comfort that there is a game plan should those revenues come about. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks, Jen.
Carolyn, and let me just ask, I'm sorry, and then are you getting is this the kind of information that is helpful for the CAC, or is there other kind of direction?
Yes, but
that was
to what Mr. Ortega just said, that is our first policy consideration. Could I ask Bruce to come up and just talk a little bit about what we were thinking, just so you guys understand?
Sure, absolutely. Bruce, while you're coming up though, Shane, did you have?
No, that's fine. I'll
Okay,
comment after.
After that, good, thank you.
Yeah, so to the committee, I mean, our number one policy consideration was the issue of how do you generate sufficient revenue to fund the plan? And our view of using the baseline is first on the basis that if you look at the last 20 years, we suffered through 200-year events, a pandemic and a depression. And if you look at the projections and how the economy's worked since the post-World War II era, we would likely expect that there's going to be a more even process of revenue generation. There'll be ups and downs. But to Mr. Ortega's point, we're recommending that we set the baseline within a contingency or a model for how you would deal if the revenues exceed or fall short of the baseline. And our recommendation is that in that process, you would also then make those cuts or those additions based upon the percentage allocations across each of the 3 categories: roadways, transit, and categoricals. So that's at the heart of our proposal. The recommendation to go to a 1/10 of a cent was something that was done at the last minute. I think the committee endorsed it because it's really striving to find a way to fund all these projects. But at the part of what we're talking about is this notion of using the baseline with a contingency model and then understanding what would happen if you go, to Mike Ortega's point, scale it up or scale it down. And that's at the heart of how we think we can get to an acceptable recommendation from the CAC.
Thank you, Shane. Thanks, Bruce.
So if I misunderstand, I think we have a proposal from the CAC that you guys got behind. And I am totally on board with the suggestion of planning for the future. My suggestion is that we plan based off of the pessimistic, model, and say, hey, if we undershoot ourselves and we actually get more revenue, then here's what we would propose to do with that revenue. But we plan based off of the pessimistic approach. And I think, I don't want to complicate cornflakes here, but I think that we're essentially there in that I know that this is, hey, here's an extra 1/10 of a percent, but why couldn't this proposal be, if we do end up seeing more money, here's kind of where the board could put that. I don't know, but I just, I kind of feel like we're super close. I just know that from my jurisdiction's perspective, coming forward with a recommendation to increase the tax is not a doable thing. Are you looking for action today? Is this just feedback?
Again, talking to the chair of the CAC, he really wanted an action from this committee because unfortunately there's different opinions. Even what you're hearing today from CAC members are their own individual opinions. The body as a whole needs an action.
So, I'm wondering, if that action could be that we recommend the left column, which was a plan that was vetted by the CAC. It was approved, the working group approved it, TMC approved it. And we say either additional sales tax option, if you wanted to go there, is here, or if we see additional revenues come in because we're basing off the pessimistic model, here's where those monies could go. Why couldn't we, that allows for further conversation, it allows for more dialogue, it allows for the policy discussions to occur, and we get something in front of the board based off of their timeline.
So I would be in agreement with Shane about moving forward with the proposal on the left. And I'm not opposed if we come in higher. I would be opposed to going back to the RTA and saying, hey, you've got an option. You want to increase. They already know that. They already understand that they can increase the tax if that's what they want to do. I think going to them and saying, if the money comes in higher, if it comes at the base or even higher, then there's other options. And we allow the CAC to continue the conversations that they've had at the last meeting, and they have, I think, a couple of more meetings on the horizon. And if they can come forward with something, here's my concern now. So if it comes in higher than what we anticipate, I still don't know that that's going to cover the overage with what we're going to see with the updated projections. So in my opinion, the number one priority still has to be the roadway corridor projects. And then if there's money left over, we can look at some of these other things. I will tell you, Carolyn and the other people on the CAC, there's, it's not on this slide, it's one of the other slides about 20 million toward 20 million toward environmental. So I don't know what that means. You know, we're going to put 20 million toward environmental. What exactly does that mean? And what's the benefit? How is that going to improve the environment? How is that going to make things better? Is it going to reduce carbon emissions to the point that it somehow is going to reduce, you know, if it can cool off the temperatures in the summer by 10 degrees, I'm all in favor of it, man. You got my vote and 100%. But what do some of those things actually translate into? Even quite frankly, some of the transit projects. What does that actually mean for the region? How many people are going to use it? How many people do we even have a clue what kind of ridership that's going to be and how that in turn is going to affect the environment? Because my understanding is that's the whole purpose, right? To have additional transit options, mass transit options, so that we reduce the number of cars that are producing emissions, and therefore it improves the environment and cools the temperature. Is that true though? Is that actually true? Is that going to happen? Is there any evidence that that's going to actually occur? So those are some of the questions. If I'm, you know, being 100% candid about some of the recommendations, I would just need to see some real recommendations that are actually going to produce results. If you tell me we're going to add a lane here and a bike path and some sidewalks, you can translate that into actual data that says this is the additional number of cars, this is how much less people will be waiting at the traffic lights, this is how many more people can use bicycles and utilize the sidewalks. You can make that argument, but I just don't know that we've done anything in the area of either environmental or transit that shows and demonstrates an impact. So those would be some of the feedback that I would have.
Okay, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Because I'm sorry, I have to leave in a couple of minutes, but I want to say again that, well, actually, first I want to clarify, when Bruce and I are talking about some of these policy considerations, we're not talking about the whole committee, we're talking about our little group because we haven't talked about it yet. But so I just wanted to clarify that we had a proposal without much discussion that people blessed. But we're having more meetings, so all the questions about what it's going to, and to clarify what Farhad was saying about Tom, because the 3 chairs, we actually were hoping to have one more meeting. We don't need your feedback today. We need it after we're done. And we were supposed to have a meeting. He wanted to have a meeting on Tuesday before, so some of these questions would be answered, or maybe not, because it would have been 2 days ago. But that it's just, we thought it was, we were surprised that staff wanted to have a meeting today of the TMC because we're not done. And they're super good questions, and we're going to be talking about it at our CAC. But we would like to give you the full package and then see what you think. But I need to go on that note.
What's the pleasure? I'm sorry.
Mike Ortega.
Oh, I'm sorry, Michael.
That's okay. I'm used to it, Jan. That's all right. Hey, so I want to differ a little bit. I did speak with Tom as well, just to make sure that I had an understanding, and I would have to echo what Carolyn just said. He wasn't looking for a vote. He is looking for feedback, and I think that going around the table, there is a lot of feedback that's been provided. Some folks have expressed concern about the increase in the tax, specificity of the plan. So I think that feedback has been provided, but I would suggest that it was not necessary. I don't think he was looking for a vote or a specific direction based on the conversation I had with him late yesterday afternoon. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Yeah, you're here, so I'll turn to you. Do you need a vote or is there feedback or what? What's your preference?
No, I think this feedback has been rich and it's really, and I've got somebody else that can remember stuff that I didn't, that I don't.
Madam Chair, we really operate on actions of the committee as she just stated. You know, hearing from 1 or 2 members is wonderful. That's perspective. But if we don't have an action from this committee, we don't really know what exactly to
What's the
report.
pleasure of the group?
Well, I'm looking for, I mean, if it has more work, I feel obligated to provide a recommendation to the board as a member of the TMC, based off of their criteria, which had a July deadline. And they wrestled with that and they didn't extend it. So I'm okay. I mean, I'm okay having another conversation as a TMC, but I want you to know that I feel committed and obligated to provide a recommendation to the board before they meet in July.
Right.
So
We have a meeting, or at least one meeting before their board meeting. I don't know.
but is that enough time for us to react to whatever you guys are doing?
And again, just for your benefit, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Carmine and Terry are the liaisons from this committee. And unfortunately, and hopefully you all attest, when there's no action, it's difficult to communicate what the feedback is. So the action is really helpful, even for your liaisons.
We would love some action to take all this feedback.
Hey, Jan. Hey, Jan.
Yeah, Michael?
So I'm gonna go on a limb here, and I would suggest that a motion would be to wait for the CAC to complete their review or analysis based on the feedback and incorporate the comments from the various agencies. You know, everybody has voiced their thoughts. They're in the minutes. I think that would, if that would give adequate direction, at least in terms of how that can be translated. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, I would also suggest that after the CAC meets, again, that the TMC as a whole be called for a meeting and react to whatever comes out of that meeting. That's my suggestion, and I would make that in the form of a motion.
There's a second.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Okay. Any additional discussion? Let me understand. I guess I'm trying to find that how do we do this, and that I don't want to continue to delay. I guess I want to make sure that the work that we've done and the recommendations are clear. But I don't want to discount or discourage any of the work that's continuing for the CAC. So that's why I'm wondering again about, can we indicate that at this point in time with what we have, our recommendations continue to move forward, but we do support and encourage the work of the CAC, and should the board ask us to reconvene or to adjust a timeline, we would do that.
I have a counter motion after we voice this one.
So again, Madam Chair, if I may, I'm sorry, go ahead, Terry.
So further discussion, I would not support the motion as given. You know, I do think, I agree with what Shane said just a few minutes ago. At this point, I think it's our obligation to put forward a recommendation to the RTA, and that absent something that is a substitute or something that is substantial or something that we can all agree upon, you know, there's no indication that, you know, the CAC meets one time or two times here in the next couple of weeks before the RTA meets, that they're going to have a recommendation saucered and blown. So I'm not opposed to them continuing the work and coming up with something, and doggone it, if they come up with something at the 11th hour and we go, hey, wow, this blows our mind, let's bring that to the RTA board. But as it stands right now, I'm 100% in favor of moving forward with what we've already recommended and allowing the CAC to continue their conversations. And if they come back with something, that's great. And if they don't, if they can't come to a consensus, then we have something solid in hand to be able to present to them.
I'm sure. Terry, I appreciate those comments. I'm not in a position to support the motion on the table right now, that's on the table right now. But I don't think that an action by this committee to support the left column with the work that we've done up to this point as a working group curtails the CAC from continuing their conversations and work regarding the policy stuff, regarding more specificity and finality to what they're proposing in the categoricals. It doesn't curtail that at all. In fact, I think that we're safe moving forward with the plan that's on the left column, because their plan is a springboard off of that plan. They're not really suggesting any in their last action. They're not suggesting any kind of cuts, material or not to what the work that we've done. So I think that we can move forward with a recommendation so our board has something to chew on. And if CAC can bring more finality to what they're proposing on the subcategoricals, all the more power to them. And I think we can present that as, because we're basing this off the pessimistic model, if those forecasts come in high and we're able to do, and it's above, what we need for the plan that's in place on the left column, then by all means, those dollars could be allocated to these other areas. So.
Okay. And when we get to, I think part of my reason for wanting a little more granularity on the motion, if we get to that, is because, as Farhad said, the only information that really goes forward is what's moved in a motion. And so if we have any of the other stuff and junk around, it would be in good shape. Carmine, and then let's get ready to vote.
So just to that last point you made, and I respect Mr. Mogimi's request to get an action out of this body today. The May 31st recommendation was approved by the ad hoc working group unanimously. So from that perspective, I don't think a vote reaffirming that action is necessary today. And I'm also hearing that if the CAC feels it necessary to further discuss and refine their recommendation, that this group says, go ahead and do that. So again, back to the point of the feedback and action component, I think feedback has been provided today. And I just want to make sure that we're not forcing a vote, because I haven't heard anything that indicates unanimous or consensus support for either of the motions that are being formulated right now.
Well, there's one on the floor, so let's see.
We do have it.
We have a motion.
I'll call the
Go
vote.
ahead.
Madam Chair, just to clarify that, there's been comments made that the TMC has not endorsed the proposal. It was the working group. That's another reason that for the TMC to take action as well.
And if I may just respond to that, the TMC jurisdictions are reflected on the ad hoc working group. Every single one of the jurisdictions is on there, and the vote of the ad hoc working group was unanimous.
I agree. Unfortunately, the comments that are being made are that the TMC didn't act on it.
Can you restate the motion? Sorry, no, okay.
So I was just going to ask you if you have Mike read.
Michael, would you please restate the motion?
You're happy to. The motion is to table any formal decision or action on the CAC proposal, and instead ask that all the feedback that has been provided by the folks at the TMC today be incorporated and translated back to the CAC. And then that we get together afterward as the TMC moving forward. And that would be before the board meeting but after the next CAC meeting.
Yes, sir.
I've heard for action, I've heard three main things I think is general consensus among all of the jurisdictions here. I think one is no to the 0.6%. I think we are continuing to recommend moving forward with the left-hand column. And the third thing is that the what's been presented by the CAC, although a great step forward, lacks specificity. Those are the three things that I've heard here today that I think that we all agreed on, and maybe that's what our action is. At least those first two things. No to the 0.6%, and to recommend moving forward with what the TMC working group has already put together.
Jan,
Yes.
I beg to differ. What I said was that there was feedback provided. The city of Tucson has not stated a position on the additional 0.1%. And I specifically said that I wanted to explore that more. And so again, there were a lot of comments against it. And that's the commentary or the feedback that I think the CAC should incorporate into their discussions going forward. But to assume that it's unanimous or that everybody has weighed in on that against would not be accurate.
We're here, yeah, Rod.
Madam Chair, is there an opportunity to restate the motion to also include, to reiterate what Mr. DeBonis was discussing about the RTA committee actually approving column to the left that was done by the ad hoc, so that we're going to wrap it all up into one motion?
Michael, would you accept a friendly amendment that allowed an element,
I'm not sure I'm following the suggestion.
just that we say, we reinforce that in addition to, well, I don't think we can do that in that the motion says we wait till we get the CAC. So I'm not sure, sorry, Ron, but let's.
It wasn't to
Yeah.
reinforce, because
No.
in hearing
Or to make the
Mr.
recommendation.
Mohimi
Sorry, to make the
said we
recommendation.
haven't actually technically
To formalize the
voted
recommendation that's. coming
as
from
a
you.
committee. The ad hoc has.
Yeah.
But not this committee.
Okay. I
So
know we're
was
gonna lose people
suggesting
in
that
about
we
3 minutes.
combine the
Got
two.
it. Thank you. And I'm not sure that we're gonna be able to do that, Rod. So maybe we'll vote on this first motion and then see if we have together, if it is not successful, is there language we can put together to get across the finish line? Yeah.
Madam Chair, in voting on it, it might be successful, but it may be a split vote. And are we helping ourselves or anyone else
Voting on what? The current motion?
on that's correct. I mean, I think, again, is a split vote any better than just letting it stand as feedback has been provided? And I think that to Mr. Ortega's point, the county has not weighed in on the 0.6 cents. We've heard the discussion. We've not had that conversation with our elected body or our representative to the RTA board. So, having an element in a motion, and I know that's not part of Michael's motion, today puts me in an uncomfortable position of how to vote on that. I believe, again, you have an ad hoc working group motion and an action that endorsed the May 31st proposal. And you have the CAC still working to flesh out the details of their proposal. And from that perspective, I think what Mr. Ortega is suggesting is let the CAC meet again, let this body then see what they have, and then decide at that point what our action is. I'm a bit conflicted here in terms of what happens in going forward with the vote. And if that's where we are and we need to call it and vote on it, then yes, we decide what happens from there.
Shane.
Madam Chair, I think procedurally, unless Mike withdraws his motion, I think we need to take action on a motion procedurally. So that, that option's on the table. And so I think we need to address the motion.
Michael, are you interested in an amendment or modifying at any point?
So here's my gut before I answer that. What are we trying to do here? Right? And I will tell you that I took issue with the TMC having voted on the ad hoc. And I think there was language from RTA staff that said the TMC had approved that. That's not true. It was the ad hoc group that had approved that. And so if we're going to split hairs, understand that's where that came from. Now, I have no problem saying that the ad hoc committee voted unanimously to go down that path and all the things that we've already talked about. So if there is an interest in the TMC addressing that, I think that's fine. I think that's an opportunity for us to talk through it. But we can't make the assumption that because the jurisdictions were at, and we had a quorum of the TMC, it was not a TMC meeting. So I think that was what caused me some concern.
I think that, and I think that goes exactly to the point that was made, I think by Farhad, I can't remember now, but
This group.
that this group needs to take an action on this in some way
I'm clear.
to solidify that element of it.
Well, here's why I think that's important.
Because some of the feedback that came from the RTA board, from at least one jurisdiction, was the TMC has not voted on this issue, and it has not taken a vote on the plan on the left.
And I think it's appropriate because the working group made a recommendation. CAC actually adopted that recommendation on June 6th. TMC has not followed that action.
Right.
So I think I see where that comment.
So Michael, I think maybe we could put something together if we could get some friendly amendments. That is to have the TMC take formal action on the working group's recommendations and the proposal, and then provide an element of, and we will, the other issues that you said about that you will now will restate the motion with the feedback initial from the or additional work could be done with feedback from the CAC or something. Or do you want to?
Yeah. So
We're not going to have consensus anywhere we go today.
I'm going to call the vote.
well, hold on a second. You asked me if I wanted to withdraw my vote, Shane, or Jan did, or not my vote, excuse me, my motion. And what I was getting ready to say is, as long as you're all clear, that was the basis for it. And number one, and number two, the reason that I suggested the direction to the CAC was because if you want to make or give formal direction, then that's what we do. With that, I would withdraw my motion at this point, short of assuming a second would withdraw as well.
Yes, thank you.
Madam Chair, again, for clarity, I thank you if I may. For clarity, I agree with Paul. We want to make sure we have feedback that is supported by a motion. So if the feedback is that the tax increase is not acceptable, that's one element. And then the second element obviously would be, how do you want to handle if there is any additional changes? How would you like them to handle that?
I would not be prepared to vote on the state tax. Simply, we've had no direction from our board. Yeah, I can reaffirm the proposal and the plan. Does that suggest that it's only the half cent, but we haven't?
Yeah, that's the first part of it that we really request adoption of that.
That's the piece we need.
Yeah.
I would like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion that we as the TMC board approve the plan on the left column, and that we allow the CAC to continue their discussions based on the feedback that we have provided today, and allow them to come back to us at a future date if they're able to come to a consensus.
Friendly amendment to that?
Sure. Well, maybe.
Let
me see what you have to say.
We're adopting this plan formally as a TMC with the intent of honoring the commitments from the board, that a recommendation come to them by their July meeting.
Yes.
If CAC can't get something to us to consider prior to that meeting with enough time for us to consider it, this is our recommendation.
Yes.
That clarification is important.
Yes.
Any further discussion?
I'll second that motion.
Jan?
Yep, Michael?
Yeah, so two things. One, this is I just want to make sure that I'm clear. So this is a reinforcement or ratification, if you will, of what the ad hoc group put together. Is that correct?
Yes.
The concern I have there is when we voted on that, I understood that part of that vote was to move the 70 million, the high capacity transit project into the transit categorical. If you remember that spreadsheet, it was on that PowerPoint that Sam did, had us moving projects as a part of that recommendation into the categoricals. That did not get translated. I want confirmation that that will in fact be included as a part of this. When we voted on that at the ad hoc, it was my understanding we were doing that. And when the materials came out from the RTA staff, that did not. was
I
not-
had left before that,
I don't-
so, yeah.
Madam Chair, just my recollection of that, Mike, is that the discussion took place and that as part of the approval that moving of the 70 million was not included. And Shane, you made the motion when the framework was adopted and there was discussion about the 70 million, and both Marana and Saw-Rita representatives said that they were comfortable with the conversation continuing through the transit subcommittee.
it was
or
a
the transit
categorical.
Working group, but that it pulled up short of the motion being amended to include actually putting that project in the transit category at 70 million is my recollection of where that ended.
Madam Chair, that is correct, and we have indicated that the RTA chair had put out a memo to that fact as well, that that was not included in the working group's action.
Yes, a good example of why we need the motion.
Yep,
Right.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Any other discussion? Are we ready to vote on the motion? Okay. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Hey,
Thank you. Two. You, was that a no? Oh, and
no,
You, and okay, and then we've got
Yep.
Robin. Okay.
Got it.
Anything else for the good of the order? Anything
No,
else?
thank you, ma'am. Members of the committee, really, it helps. I'll have a follow-up conversation with Mr. McGovern, and that clarity is critical. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you all. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Well, so Terry.